welcome to another episode of Movie Schmovie. This is episode number 211. Wow, 211, is that right?
Yeah, man, we've done it somehow.
Wow, that's crazy. Today, I know on the last episode, where we had the questions from our friends and family and everybody at the Sports Podcast, we mentioned doing the Schmovie Awards for this episode, but we actually have decided to push it back one episode. That is an episode that we really prefer to record in person, all three of us in the same room. And due to a few different circumstances, this week we actually are doing this remotely in our respective homes. So John kind of threw around the idea, kind of so that we can be together for the Schmovie Awards, which we really have a lot of fun doing. Mainly because of the tabulation from PricewaterhouseCoopers. Just liking going through all that. Schmooper, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. The hat. No. Do we get a hat? No, that's a different episode. But there's lots of fun stuff happening in person for that episode. So today, John's suggestion was, in the shadow of the big release of Avengers Infinity War, we're going to go over some of our top MCU moments. And I think we're going to each go through 5. To circle back a bit, the voice you're hearing now is me. I'm Steve.
I'm John.
I'm Ron.
I know, Ronald, you were talking earlier today that you're like, I'm kind of like burned out on some of this superhero stuff.
I'm exhausted.
Yeah, I think that's valid.
To me, this is a good superhero fatigue episode because the moments that I remembered most from these movies weren't always the kind of big moments. And I don't know if we would say that says something about the Marvel model, that when you look at your favorite moments, they aren't necessarily the climaxes of the movies or the set pieces. They a lot of times are the character moments or the jokes. And I don't honestly feel like we've had time to fully process what Black Panther was and what it represented to the culture and how excited we are about that movie. So this is kind of the shortest gap with the biggest payoff at the end of it, you know, going from Black Panther, which was huge, to totally. Infinity War, which is set up to be the hugest thing ever. It does sort of feel like I'm going, I'm still full from dinner, and someone's bringing around that dessert tray.
Right.
I hope after this episode we can kind of sit back and be satisfied that we did our best to cover it.
Oh yeah. The only thing I can really like in this too is, you remember a couple years ago, Iron Man 3? Do you remember how I felt when we were talking about that movie? When I was just like, yeah. I'm tired. I've seen so many movies at this point. It's kind of similar, but yeah, you're right. There are definitely some moments in the universe that aren't necessarily like, you know, people getting kicked off of cliffs and stuff like that I really equate to being really good moments. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say. So I'm excited.
It is cool to be in the conversation going through some of our favorite moments. I think just before we go into, you know, this amazing culmination of something that's really never been done before after whatever it is, like 18 or 19 movies. So to kind of go through each of our respective tops, I think that's kind of cool to kind of see where we're at before we go in to see Infinity War. So this should be fun.
Well, I guess since it was my suggestion that we approach it this way, I'll jump in. I think the Marvel films have realized all along that humor would be the way to both point out to the audience that the characters sort of know that they're in an absurd situation. You know, it helps when you have a talking raccoon and you have a guy who shrinks down to an ant and a talking plant. It helps to use humor to let an average audience go, oh, okay, this movie knows how ridiculous it is. And then there are those moments of humor that are sort of, that tie up a lot and reveal character and push the story forward and do something that satisfies something the audience kind of needs to know.
Yeah.
There's one that jumped out at me as one of the best uses of humor to reveal character in all of these movies was from Black Panther, and it's M'Baku's "We're Vegetarians" line. Where you know, the T'Challa is thought dead, and the remainder of his entourage are there asking M'Baku for help. And Everett Ross, played by Martin Freeman, who is brilliantly put in the, you know, normally this is the role that Ernie Hudson gets to play. Or, you know, it's the black friend of the white hero normally that you see, who's sort of secondary, but is competent and helpful, but is not really there to have an arc of his own. And Martin Freeman does a great job of playing that sort of, here's a competent CIA agent. He's not evil. He's a friend of T'Challa's, but he's not a major player in this scene, and he has to constantly be reminded to the point where he seems to respect it, that he's there to sort of take orders and see how he can pitch in and help. He's not there to lead the show.
Right.
And so M'Baku's been kind of shutting him down in this scene, and he says this thing that, in retrospect, is ridiculous. But when we were first watching the movie, we believed maybe this character was going to be this type of guy. He says that, to Everett Ross, one more word and I'll feed you to my children. And he very quickly says, just kidding, we're vegetarians, which is both a great joke about if you were a tribe based on a gorilla is a mostly vegetarian animal. So the gorilla tribe would be vegetarians. But it also sort of takes this character who could have been incredibly problematic. In the comics, M'Baku was kind of an ape man. And you can see why this version of this film, they really wanted to get away from that notion of this character. But they kept that. They kept that he's part of the gorilla tribe. But they made it sort of part of him being advanced and having something kind of different about him. And I don't know, from that moment on, M'Baku became probably my favorite character in that movie. So yeah, I just think that's it's a joke. It reveals character. It also helps with Everett Ross's character because you see that for a moment he's willing to believe that this guy is going to crush him and feed him to his children. He actually believes he's talking to a savage on some level. And he has his nose kind of rubbed in that assumption, and so does the audience. And I think to the audience that is worried that M'Baku is about to become a caricature or that he is kind of a caricature, I feel like that line just gives that final thing that just says this character is not who you thought he was from the beginning.
Steve?
Yeah, I'll throw mine in next. So the one thing I did kind of find that when I was going through all these moments, like I did kind of feel like I didn't have a whole lot of like the humor beats in my choices. Like there's a lot of just more, I don't know, like just moments, action, things like that really stood out to me when I first started thinking about this. And one of the action set pieces that stands out to me, I kind of tried to approach it from like having like a moment of humor, a fight sequence of, maybe one-on-one versus like a group fight sequence or whatever. And the one that stood out to me when I was thinking of the one-on-one fighting was in a scene that I love and I think is incredible is the scene in Captain America Winter Soldier that ends up basically being the Winter Soldier versus Captain America on the street. And basically the scene starts with them driving along a freeway. Black Widow's in the car. Steve Rogers is, I think, driving. And there's like an agent in the back. And Falcon's in the car with them. And, the Winter Soldier, it goes from like, him leaping on the vehicle to a fight scene on the freeway to him jumping off. And then he fights Black Widow. And it's a cool scene. With Black Widow kind of showing off her fighting skills and some of the tech that she has when she's able to disable his arm. And what it culminates in is really just Steve Rogers fighting the Winter Soldier. The fight choreography is really incredible, and a lot of use of removing and reintroducing the shield into the fight sequence, and ultimately coming to the point where Steve is kind of gets an upper hand and is able to pull off the mask. And then when he's unmasked and that look that he gets after all this fight sequence, when he realizes who it is and he says Bucky, and the Winter Soldier just replies, who the hell's Bucky? I love that sequence. I think it's probably one of my favorite one-on-one fighting sequences in the entire MCU. There's not a lot of CG. There's a lot of choreography, a lot of hand-to-hand combat that's shot really well by the Russo brothers. And it's one of the things that really kind of throws Winter Soldier, when I think about it, to, as one of my favorite films in the MCU. But that fight sequence, to see these two friends battling one another, not knowing who the other is at that moment, and then that moment of realization is just, it's just, you can feel the shock in Steve Rogers, in his face and his look in that, and when he says Bucky. I just thought it was a great moment.
In general, I think the action in Winter Soldier is probably the best action of all of the Marvel films.
Yeah.
Like the best for that visceral feeling, because the Russo brothers handled the action in Civil War as well, but it was a little bit more CGI and a little bit more going on, and it was just, a little bit more frantic.
Yeah.
But I feel like those fight scenes in Winter Soldier, there's another one in the movie that I would have almost been hard to pick which fight scene was the best from that film, but I agree the emotional stakes in that moment really goose it along.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. My first one is from 2008's Iron Man. It's a cave scene with Iron Man. It's kind of an homage to one of the first Iron Man suits from it's like the 60s.
Right, the big clunky one.
Yeah, the big clunky one, and he's like getting stuck in the cave, and he's trying to defend himself as people are shooting him and hitting him with grenades and stuff like that. I just think that scene is really an interesting sort of introduction to the eternal battle that Iron Man's gonna have with constantly tweaking the suit. You know what I mean? Like it's not a thing that stops, and I think that's one of the cooler parts about who he is. Like, you know, Iron Man, like Batman in the DC universe, doesn't have any superpowers. It's just his smarts and trying to make himself better. And this is the first real battle that we get to see with him. And it is very clunky. It is very weird. But he winds up escaping from this cave where he was trying to get rid of some bad guys. It's just a really well done scene. And it's just a kind of hint of things to come. So I really like that scene.
Don't you think that's also part of that very grounded ramp up they used?
Oh yeah,
the
definitely.
Iron Man movie as a way of starting with something very ground, or it's still basically fantasy, but that idea that you see him building the suit and that you see that it's kind of shitty at first, that it's not elegant at first. I do think that was. It reminds me of in the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man films, one of the best portions of the movie was when he's wearing like a modified like sweatpants and sweatshirt and he's learning how to use his powers. I always love that part. I don't want him to always milk that, but when it's done well, I like when you get to see the kind of learning curve of what eventually will become this person's, superpower, basically.
Yeah, that's so good to watch.
And you're right, Ronald, it's a visual Easter egg for fans of the comic because the early Iron Man drawing is this amazingly unsleek, unaerodynamic looking thing.
Definitely. It looks like he could barely walk in it. And it looked even worse when he was walking in it in the movie. So I thought that was really cool.
For my next moment, I have chosen a moment in a film that I think is in the lower tier for most people of Marvel films. And it's a movie that tried to do a lot, and I think it did some things successfully and other things not successfully, and that would be Avengers Age of Ultron. One of my favorite moments in any Marvel movie is the moment where Hawkeye is giving Scarlet Witch a pep talk, trying to get her to come out and join the fight. And it's not so much the dramatic stakes of her joining the fight that matter. It's the fact that in this story we've seen that Clint Barton, who is Hawkeye, played by Jeremy Renner, who up to this point really didn't get much to do in any of these films, and he's a pretty decent actor, so it was good in Age of Ultron to see him kind of rounded out as a character. And they may have laid it on a little thick, but the scene where he's talking to Scarlet Witch, and he's finished talking to her, and he's about to go back out into the fight, and he's kind of talking to himself, and he says, "The city is flying, we're fighting an army of robots, and I have a bow and arrow." I just love that as an acting moment for Jeremy Renner, and as a character moment that, again, totally defines who this version of this character is. He, in the comics, he's not a family man. In the movies, they've decided he's the normal one. He's the one who doesn't have powers, and we see that he's got a reason that he would just want to shit can the superhero thing and go home. So yeah, I think that moment really plays in the movie and as just an isolated bit of one of the best examples of them underlining the normal humans who are caught up in this crazy mess.
For my next one, I guess I'll go with a scene from the first Avengers film, which is probably what a lot of people, this is one of the ones that most people will probably go to as a favorite. But I mean, it deserves the mention is simply the like assemble scene in New York after Loki is, he manages to open up the portal and the Chitauri are coming to Earth, and the five of them are, or the six of them are, well, the five of them are together on the street, and like Bruce Banner rides up on the motorcycle, and I mean they just all get together at one time, and he says something like, "That's my secret. I'm always angry," when Captain America tells him to get angry. And, you get that shot, like that 360 shot of them all just kind of ready. And as Captain America is kind of like dishing out what everybody's supposed to do, I just love it when he ends the little directive that he's giving, and he just says, and Hulk, he's got a beat, and he says smash, and then that shot, you get that 360 shot, and it's just like, it was that phase 1 culmination of just seeing them on the screen together, and being able to fight together and these characters together on the screen for the first time was just a really cool shot.
Steve, that's one of my near misses on my also rans. As I just have written down Avengers in the Street.
Yeah.
And I remember when the trailer that had that shot in it, the first big trailer that really showed them all together.
Yeah.
And also possibly maybe establishing an early Marvel tradition of spoiling some of the best moments in the trailer. But, maybe we'll get to that another time.
Right.
But I just remember getting and I don't have a big emotional attachment to any of these particular characters. Like, going back, these weren't my comic book characters necessarily. I was a Hulk fan at different points, and
sure,
I liked these other characters. But just seeing that they had done it, I think I actually whispered, "They did it."
Yeah. Oh, totally.
My moment is, I don't know if people consider this I don't know. I think this is huge just because it's just such one of the better intros I've seen in my entire life. And that's the intro to Guardians of the Galaxy 2 with Baby Groot playing Electric Light Orchestra's Mr. Blue Sky and dancing around. Fuck, man. I don't think I've ever been ready for a movie more than when I saw that moment. Say what you may about the second one, it still had a lot of heart, and it was a really fun film. And it just worked really well to me. It's not perfect, but it's so fucking fun. And that scene, to me, kind of created the feeling that you pretty much have for the majority of the film. And if you want a little Easter egg, Google James Gunn Baby Groot, and you get to see him do the actual dance that Baby Groot did as he kind of ran around that circle as that monster was attacking everybody. And I just think it's such a fun scene. So, is it?
That's such a great choice, Ronald, and I love that you pointed out how happy you were at that moment. I think there's something about that, when you love a band and you get the new album, the first song, you're so ready for it, you're so there for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
I think we all had so much goodwill built up towards the idea that when we saw the first Guardians, we were like, yes, bring on a sequel, give it to us now, 3 years, okay, we'll wait. And then I believe we saw that together, Ronald, and I believe we looked at each other when we were sitting down to see it with this air of it's here, it's Christmas morning.
Oh,
you
yeah,
just
definitely.
felt good. You just felt like you have so much goodwill bound up, and that moment, that scene is such just an explosion of taking advantage of your goodwill. It's like James Gunn thought, what would people, if they liked the first movie and they liked this and they liked all this, what would they love to see? Well, they would love to see a moment that's like that beginning of Guardians 1 with the sort of extended musical break, but deepen it with all these other characters. And it also, by the end of that scene, you totally get the idea that Groot is a baby now that everybody sort of takes care of, because throughout that scene, everybody has their own moment of trying to keep him out of trouble, No, it's beautiful and hilarious, and that's a fantastic song, too.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
You're up, John.
Well, my next pick will bridge nicely from the Guardians theme. It's another moment I believe I've talked about on the show a few times, like the Hawkeye speech. It's the moment in the bar where Peter Quill has left his new ragtag team alone for half a second to take care of some business, and he comes in and sees that Drax and Rocket have gotten into an argument that has spilled over into potential violence, and I believe Rocket has a gun out, and he's getting ready to kill Drax and possibly Gamora and possibly everyone. And Peter Quill has to come in and kind of make peace between these characters, and so it's fun to see him assuming that sort of caring older brother / dad role that he sort of begrudgingly takes on for this group. But it also really, up till that moment, maybe I had been sort of questioning why they got Bradley Cooper to do the voice of Rocket Raccoon, and why he was doing kind of a Bronx cab driver sort of voice. I wasn't sure what was going on with that character, having loved it from my childhood. But I was like, Bradley Cooper, really? Couldn't they get somebody who's like a great voice actor or a quirky guy? Why did they get the good-looking guy? And in this scene, Rocket you see his vulnerability, you see how hurt he is, you see how everybody kind of kicking him around and even though he is a little asshole, everyone kind of treating him like an asshole is just making it worse, He says, he called me vermin and she called me rodent. and he's kind of crying. It's that kind of anger and losing control of your emotions at the same time that's just so vulnerable. And I'd read somewhere that James Gunn said that he felt the most akin to Rocket of all the characters. And that's such a lot of depth to put into this computer-generated raccoon, that we've only met 45 minutes ago. So yeah, I remember being very affected by that scene because it ends with this sort of uneasy truce, and you get a sense that this family might figure out how to function. But you've seen at that point that Rocket has a very short fuse and a very thin skin, and some other mixed metaphors that I could use to describe this character, who's probably one of my favorite ones in all the movies. But that moment is just great, and it gets me every time. Like I just feel that welling up in my throat. Those moments when your feelings are so hurt and you're so mad, and you just don't know how to bottle it up.
It's a good scene. Yeah. It's my turn. So I'll go from one massive pair up of many Avengers in one scene to another, and that'll be the airport sequence in Captain America's Civil War.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think even if you remove that scene from the MCU, it's in a conversation of being one of the coolest, best looking, well staged, choreographed, whatever action sequences like any movie, like period. Like I think the way that they were able to introduce Spider-Man in costume into that fight and work him in, grabbing the shield and seeing Captain America face off against Spider-Man and getting Ant-Man in there and Giant Man and Hawkeye shooting Ant-Man on an arrow. It was so just well staged that so many times you see big set pieces like that, it's really easy to kind of get lost in what's even happening or who you should even be watching or who you should be caring about in that moment. But again, I think that the Russo brothers, and this is why I have so much excitement about to see what they do with the next Avengers film, they just have a great understanding and a great touch in terms of how they put these action sequences in place. And I think that, the ability to use CGI in a way that is helping us understand what's happening in the scene as opposed to muddying it up or confusing what's happening. But yeah, just to see that massive overflow of, this war of words in this where the Avengers have kind of separated in their thoughts about what's right and what's wrong and who's kind of aligned with Captain America and who's aligned with Iron Man. And to that point, it had all just been words and disagreement and, things like that. And to see that kind of battle happen, and again, I'll stress, like, importantly, to introduce Spider-Man in that manner and so well, and it's like a applause-worthy moment when you see this stuff happening. And I know that when we saw it together, there were so many moments throughout it that people were just like losing their shit watching that scene, whether it's Spider-Man coming in or him grabbing the shield or Hawkeye shooting Ant-Man on the arrow. There's just so much to enjoy and just to kind of drop your jaw at. And Ant-Man has that line, "Something just flew in me." I remembered that. And that's just like a fucking hilarious line. And I don't know, man. It's such an iconic scene now, and I'm sure that they're going to attempt to one-up it in Infinity War. But I think they accomplished so much, just kind of getting Spider-Man in the mix and showing this battle. And while there's no consequence in this battle or real stakes in this battle for the characters, it does show a culmination of actual like physical fighting between them outside of just disagreements and words to that point. And it's just a fucking treat to look at. So
I feel like what happens with War Machine is enough of a thing to say they're showing that in this PG-13 world that these friends just fought and did something awful to one of their friends. So I do think that it had the emotional impact of brutal life or death stakes, even though you're right, the characters were mostly trying not to hurt each other, but whoever they were fighting, they were trying to contain them.
Right.
I just want to say, Steve, you kind of highlighted this, but I think it's worth mentioning how every character in that fight feels like if you had been following them, this scene would belong in their movie. If this was an Ant-Man movie, this scene would be a great scene in an Ant-Man movie. If this was a Spider-Man movie, this would be...
It's a great point.
And I've heard people say that felt like too much, But I agree with you that the Russos showed a real knack for giving each character just enough. I mean, let's bear in mind, this is the same movie that introduced Black Panther, 20 minutes before that, and we already felt like we knew him by this point.
It's crazy.
So no, it was a very successful juggling of many characters, which does give me hope for Infinity War, which I hope is not just one explosion after another. What do you think of that, Ronald? Like kind of how they have handled these big action scenes, these big money scenes?
Well, that's actually related to. So my answer is going to be my pick, which is also the same thing that Steve picked, but also it'll answer kind of how I feel about it. I mean, in general, Civil War was one of the movies I was the most hesitant about, mostly because I had read Civil War, you had read Civil War. There were all these joke memes that kind of showed what the real Civil War looked like in the comics and what it looked like in the movies. Like, it was very scattered. There weren't as many people. So my fear was, would it have the same feeling when they clashed that the comic book did when they had an actual the Civil War in the comics? And it more than exceeded it. It more than exceeded it. Particularly the way that it happened, because it was like it happened based on some tension. I don't know if you remember specifically what started the big fight, but Iron Man and Captain America were in a pretty heated argument, and then Spider-Man takes his shield.
Because their moms were both named Martha or something, right? I can't remember.
some shit. But yeah. But that kind of kicked it off. Like, it was the first thing. You're like, oh, fucking Spider-Man? And then it just got better and better and better and better and better. And then it also didn't feel as gimmicky as I thought it was going to be. It kind of just felt like they were using whatever they could in their moment of desperation as they were trying to survive and not kill each other at the same time, which was really interesting. So I love that scene, and I think they handle, with the exception of Age of Ultron, I think that every big fighting scene that they've done up until this point has been kind of incredible. And I was going to use the one that Steve was saying, like the battle outside between Bucky and Captain America, but I had a feeling that somebody else was going to say it because it's such a good fucking scene. So yes, to answer your question, I think they've handled it very well. And it's interesting how they take the little tools that they have, the little people that they have. I'm not trying to say little, the very few amount of people that they have in comparison to bigger wars that have existed in the comic books, and they make it work in such a cool way. And you almost kind of forget about the comic book stuff after that. You're like, oh, I like this smaller sort of battle royale. So yeah, I like it.
You're right. It's 6 people on each side rather than 20 people.
Right.
But I think that what they do is they make it feel that monumental because it just fills the screen. Is that your final thought on the battle, Ronald? So that was your pick?
Yeah. That was my pick.
All right, my 4th pick. There was one moment that stood out to me as both important to the character and kind of important to the whole franchise. The whole franchise got started with Iron Man. And the moment at the end where at the press conference where Robert Downey Jr. / Tony Stark says, I'm Iron Man. Not only is it a nod to the song that then starts, but it's also this character moment that just sets up that here's a guy whose ego is not going to let him have a secret identity. And that has been so important. If you think about that, that's the guy we've been watching through all these movies. And whether we love him or hate him, there's something built into Tony Stark where you're supposed to kind of think he's full of himself. I don't know. I just think I walked out of that first Iron Man movie buzzing, and a lot of it had to do with that kind of iconoclastic moment, a moment that didn't seem like it was trying to build up this giant mythic character. It seemed like it was trying to say, this guy is a character just like anyone else Robert Downey Jr. would play. These characters that weren't necessarily part of a connected universe yet, It didn't have the weight of all that.
Yeah.
It was just a movie about a guy.
My next one is one that I couldn't wait to talk about because... which is, why I saved it for second to last. But I think about from when we started this podcast, and even in just a recent memory of like my experiences going to the movies with my friends, with you guys, with family, whatever it has been in terms of theater experiences. Then I narrow it down to just the relationship to the MCU. A scene that stands out to me is I can remember Ronald and I going to see the first Avengers film together at the White Marsh Theater, and the scene at the end of the movie where the Hulk beats the shit out of Loki, and both of us sitting forward in our chairs and like just being giddy, and I think I even like clapped and yelled something out loud. I don't even remember like that many detail, but it's one of those moments, just even beyond an MCU moment, just a theater going experience, with all the goodwill and or just the way that they built up Loki in the film and in the Thor films, so that you kind of have this goodwill towards his character, and to see him confront the Hulk and belittle him and see him as just this, I don't even know, just somebody beneath him. And I think he says, I'm a god. And then Hulk just beats the shit out of him and calls him a puny god and walks off. And you see Loki kind of smash into the ground and just whimpering. It's hilarious. It's just a cheer moment. And people, I can remember the audience just like cheering, which is not like really a super common thing in my experience in theaters much anymore. I mean, it happens, but and I don't know. I just remember sitting next to Ronald and like looking at him, and both of us just being like yes, that was amazing.
Yeah.
And it was just a really cool sequence, and mentioning the assemble scene earlier, like kind of seeing how this scene where it comes after that scene. I don't know, man. It was just so freaking fun. I think of like when I started talking earlier in the podcast, like a lot of action sequences come out, and there's definitely a lot of great one-liners and zingers and things like that. And this scene has the puny god zinger, and I think that's hilarious. But it's just that moment of like the ego of Loki and just what he sees the Hulk as, or this, there's just this monster literally, and just to watch the Hulk beat the shit out of him with zero effort. It's just great. I absolutely love it.
That is such a Joss Whedon moment too. To take this moment that you've built up,
absolutely,
and to deflate the moment in a way that feels like anti-cinematic. But then when you think about the logic of the situation, You're like, there's no other way this could have gone. It would have been cool to see them fight.
Yeah.
But no, it's not going to be a fight with the Hulk.
Yeah.
What you got, Ron?
So mine is actually 2008 Edward Norton's Hulk, which nobody gives credit to as like kind of forming the version of Hulk that we see in the Avengers movie.
I'm sure Edward Norton gives it credit.
I know.
Quietly in his dark mansion.
Right, as he punches a wall.
Punches a picture of Mark Ruffalo.
Right. Because without this Hulk, without this culmination of, we had the Ang Lee one, which was okay. This one was really solid. And it got into the subtlety of just how vicious the Hulk could be at times. And one of the scenes is when the government kind of attacks him, and he's running beside a tank, and instead of like tackling it, he nudges it with his shoulder, and it just kind of flips a couple times. And I liked how that was. Like that scene was a really well shot scene to me, but that in particular was kind of a moment where I was like, man, Hulk has there's like a dance when it comes to his destruction. And that's the first time we got to see it in a way that didn't look kind of corny the way that the Ang Lee one did. It's something it's like a dance that he had. Like if you look at those scenes, they are so similar to the ones in Avengers and everything else that he does after that it's kind of scary.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think that that's the beginning of the Hulk that we've come to know.
Yeah.
And I don't think people give him enough credit because he was a great Hulk.
Wasn't there a lot of fighting in the editing room between the
Yes.
director and Ed Norton or something like that?
He rewrote the script too, I think.
What do you think it would be like if we'd had the Norton Hulk in Ragnarok or in the Avengers films or whatever? Do you think I love Mark Ruffalo as Bruce Banner in this role, but who do you think is the better Hulk, the better Banner?
I gotta give it to Ruffalo.
Yeah, we've got to see more sides. I tell you this. I wouldn't have said that until I saw Thor Ragnarok. Thor Ragnarok kind of solidified it for me. I mean, he was always great in the other ones, but
Yeah.
him kind of functioning as Banner in this world, I thought that was incredible, man. And it's something that they just didn't show prior to that. Not in the way that they showed in Ragnarok.
It's like you're seeing Banner as separate from the Hulk. In Ragnarok, Hulk is more of a character. And so you get a sense of who Banner is as opposed to the Hulk, whereas before it felt like you have Banner and then you have the monster he turns into.
Right.
Mark Ruffalo is kind of a vulnerable actor. He's got this softness to him, and I think it's interesting that he's playing the Hulk. So, well, does that bring it to me and my final pick?
Yes, sir.
All right. In Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, I guess I'll just say a character has died. And earlier in the film, there was some question as to whether this character had been ostracized from his group, the Ravagers, that he was part of. And at the end of the movie, you see that not only was he not fully ostracized from the group, but the group is now coming back to respect him and to give him a proper Ravagers funeral. Which involves like fireworks and a bunch of stuff that normally wouldn't have a lot of weight. It would feel a little mawkish. I think the end of Guardians of the Galaxy 2, it really piles on the sort of emotional moments, and I think some of the moments work better than others. But a moment that really snuck up on me and continues to have impact on me, and even as I think about it, I just love the emotions that it has in it, is when Kraglin, played by Sean Gunn, James Gunn's brother, who also does the mocap work for Rocket Raccoon. Unfortunately, they don't have Bradley Cooper crawling around in a green leotard for 6 months on a soundstage. Big surprise. But where Kraglin reacts to the funeral, and it's this yelp of joy and sadness that he gives. He's sort of heartbroken, but he's also overcome with emotion. And it's this character who was a tertiary character in the first movie, and he's a secondary character in the second movie. And by the end of the second movie, he's kind of part of the family that you have come to know of these characters. And they've got this Cat Stevens song playing on the soundtrack, Father and Son, which again should be such a cheesy moment, such a cheesy choice. But the way James Gunn uses the music in these films to underscore the emotions of the characters and to sort of supply the kind of character building of who would select this song and why this song would be, being played by this character at this time. It's just, to me, it's the culmination of all that stuff. And this little moment with Kraglin where we see that he's sort of surprised and overjoyed that his friend, who he always appreciated, that his friend is finally getting the appreciation that he feels he deserved. I didn't expect there to be a beautiful moment with this character at the end of this movie. So I think that is the moment I put at the top, just because of all the clips that I watched today, it's the moment that when he kind of yelps, and it's this sort of Howard Dean kind of animal yelp. It's just this kind of beautiful moment. I don't know if the moment stood out to you guys or if you remember that ending as particularly powerful at all, but that was what I loved, that, and particularly that character seeing his friend get respected and that overwhelming him. I just feel like, I don't know, that's such a sweet thing to have happen.
I love that you called it a Howard Dean scream. I really like that moment. That's funny. Oh, man.
Excuse me. All right, so my final MCU moment, and it's hands down my favorite scene in any Marvel film, and one of my favorite scenes in movies of the last, I don't even know how long, only because of how invested I am in the whole character arc of Captain America. And I've said this before, and I've said it to friends, and I feel like I'm a broken record, but I always mention it because I feel like it is it's proof of how well they've done with developing characters in this world, and it's specifically Captain America. We always talk about, I'm the one that's not the comic guy. I know some stuff. I've read some stuff, but I'm definitely not versed in it like you guys are. And through the course of these films, the Captain America films, and even the other films that he's been in, I mean, I've grown to absolutely love the character of Captain America and Steve Rogers and Chris Evans' performance as this in this role. And it just goes through this whole experience of not knowing much about it, knowing who the character was, growing with First Avenger, the Winter Soldier, the Civil War, and just seeing how much I cared about what he stands for and what his point in arguing with Tony is, and his loyalty and defense of Bucky, and all these things that he stands for. I don't know. It just really hits me. And at the last 15 minutes of Civil War, basically, and more specifically, when Tony Stark finds out, what Bucky has done as the Winter Soldier to his parents, and in the moment just before where he's almost basically willing to compromise and understand where Steve's coming from and things like that, and what manipulation Zemo was able to do to kind of dispel that information to Tony, and basically just how it jumps off from that point, and to see the fight sequence as they're climbing up those racks in the chute and fighting Steve, and Bucky are fighting Tony, and Tony's fighting Bucky, and Tony's fighting. It's just that interplay as Bucky is trying to get out and Steve is trying to help him get out, and Tony has like one of his lifters busted and he's doing it, he's doing it with like one leg, and his sight thing, like the shark, whatever, the I don't even know what the word is, I'm blanking out, like being able to shoot the phasers like perfectly at it.
Viewfinder,
yeah, something like that. Like he goes into like manual mode. He's like eyeballing it. It's just this great build to you thinking that he's gonna get out, to the moment you realize that they're stuck in there and that they're about to beat the shit out of one another. And we always talk about stakes, and maybe in the end here there aren't any like casualties, but there's some pretty big stakes, and emotionally and physically for some characters. But as it culminates and you see Iron Man fighting a team up of Bucky and Captain America, I still watch this scene. I've watched this like 5 times and talking about this episode with friends and like trying to figure out what I was going to pick. And I mean, there was no doubt in my mind it was going to be on my list, but I watched it over and over and over, and it gives me cold chills. Like the moment that Bucky jumps into the fight and tosses the shield back to Captain America, and they're like bouncing it back and forth and just trying to beat, trying to stay afloat in this fight against this Iron Man, and what he has abilities to do is just phenomenal. And there's a couple lines of dialogue that just give me cold chills. The moment when they break from the action and Steve says that this is not going to change what happened, and Tony says, I don't care, he killed my mom, it like gives me like an emotional like chill through my body. And they go back to the fight, and there's another moment where Tony says something to Steve, and he goes back to the line from the first Avenger, when he was the puny Steve Rogers, and he says to the thug in the alley, I could do this all day. He has that moment in this scene where he kind of pulls that line back up as he's being beaten down by Iron Man. And he says it again, and it's just like, it's amazing.
I almost feel like this is a twist, as though I am Zemo. Was that the name of Daniel Bruhl's character?
Yeah. Yeah, Zemo.
As though I lured you into this trap, because I really couldn't decide whether to put the I could do this all day moment as my number one, and I thought to myself, Steve will probably put that as his number one, so I can put my Ravager's Funeral at number one. So the twist is, I knew you would choose that one. I knew that would be one of your favorites.
Yes.
Anyway, I agree. I think that character and that scene and that line are so important to the whole Marvel universe, and I'm glad I knew you so well.
It's just such an amazing scene, and like when they come out of that line and they're battling still, and Bucky kind of gets the upper hand and tries to pull out that arc reactor and blows his arm off. And at that moment, that's that hero shot of like, you get that shot through the concrete columns of Iron Man like firing his like blaster, and Captain America just deflecting it with the shield. And you have that like iconic moment that I'm sure is maybe a panel in the comics that you guys could probably reference, but it's just such an epic shot. Like I want that as like a wallpaper on my computer or something like that. Like it's just such a cool, the color tones of the blue and the red, and just like the way that it's composed. It's just such an epic moment. And I mean, and that's all to say, at the same time that all this is happening, the Black Panther is out on the rocks, kind of basically detaining Zemo and like preventing him from being able to take an easy way out. Mm-hmm. And realizing what he's managed to do to manipulate these characters to try to kill one another. And that's all happening outside at the same time that these leads are inside trying to kill one another. And it's just an amazing sequence. And like I said, like even outside of the MCU, it's one of my favorite scenes in movies, period. Like I get shook watching that sequence. And I just have this image of like them tossing that shield around. It's so awesome to watch. And that team up that Bucky and Steve finally have, like when their powers are at max and they're fighting together and like they'd always intended to do, it's just amazing, and I absolutely love it.
And it's so ironic that it's against a guy who we love, a hero that we love.
Yeah.
I think you're right. It's all the more painful because we see how it almost. I mean, of course, we know there's a fight because we know what this movie's supposed to be, but they show you this almost possible truce and this way of looking at it where Tony might come to see Bucky as a person who was victimized, and then there's something that he just can't bear, and you don't blame him. And it's not the conflict. Yeah. It's not the conflict that was brewing throughout the rest of the movie. That's what's interesting is they diffuse the whole Sokovia Accords conflict. Then what actually makes them fight is something you can't get past,
Yeah, there's just so much to love. And I forgot to even mention the line where he says, like, I'm sorry, he's my friend. And I think it may be earlier in the scene or earlier in that conflict, like, and Tony says something. What does he say? Like, I was too one time or something like that?
He says he's my friend, and he says, so was I.
Yeah, that's it. So good.
It's a good scene.
All right, Ronald, what you got? Take us home.
All right, so a theme in a lot of the Marvel movies is family and friends. And up until the last Marvel offering, we had never really seen a sibling interaction quite like the one between Black Panther and his sister. And as a person who has a little sister who takes digs at him whenever she can, who's super witty and smart, and still, no matter what you do as a person, I could go up on stage, make hundreds of people laugh. When I get off stage, I'm still the washed up older brother of Rachel. You know what I mean? So, the scene with Black Panther and his sister, Shuri, is one of my favorite scenes I've ever seen in a film. Not even just like superhero films, just in general. You just don't see those interactions between siblings ever in something done quite as well as that was done, and with as much chemistry and and she gets the upper hand. I think that's kind of the cool part about this movie is that it's a weird idea that for everybody else you have to be this person, but when you get home around these strong women, you're just who you are. You know what I mean? And you often find that women are much smarter and well planned out and strategic and giving and caring than you could ever be. And there's something about how that all kind of culminates through that interaction that I can relate to.
What are those?
Yeah, that's the best. That's a great scene, man. It's just, it's. I'm sure everybody felt kind of similar when they were watching it, but yeah, that scene really did something to me, man. So
Shuri just pops as a character. She's a highlight of the whole franchise.
Yeah.
And let's think about the way, as recently as Thor Ragnarok, Taika Waititi's character of Korg was also a character that really popped and gave people a lot of pleasure. So I think it's interesting how at this late date they're still adding new characters who kind of steal the whole universe for you, for a little bit. Shuri popped up in the trailer for Infinity War, and I was already going like, how are they handling her? Does she look good? Are they shooting her the right way? I think people are very protective of these characters.
Right.
Someone tweeted about how in Civil War, Black Panther is the most mature, together character you've ever seen, and then he goes home and is instantly roasted by all the women in his life.
Yes. I know that feeling.
Well, did we just do it?
Those are all some good picks. Yeah.
I think we just did it.
One character that's completely missing from any of these moments, and more or less all of these movies, is Thanos. And we're about to see a whole movie that's trying to trade on the awesome menace of Thanos. What do you guys think? Do you think they're going to be able to pull off what they keep saying they've tried to do, which is create a character that I've heard comparisons to Killmonger, that he's going to be a villain who could be the hero of a different movie? I mean, what do you get from the pixels that you've seen thus far of that? I guess plus Josh Brolin's voice, but mostly pixels. What do you think of Thanos?
Right now, he's looking bland as fuck. That's the one thing that I could say. Out of all the things right now that are working for Infinity Wars, that's not quite working for me yet. His motivations aren't quite. I'm not quite getting who he is. I'm not quite getting, and hopefully they at least do a good job of expressing his motivations in a way that makes sense to us. Because right now it's not making any sense. We haven't seen him enough. We haven't heard him enough. He hasn't done enough. And he's just kind of popping up saying these ominous things to everybody. And it's not lining up to me yet. So I don't know how you guys feel about it, but
what do you think, Steve?
I mean, I gotta be honest. Like, I feel like they've earned my trust at this point. I mean, especially the Russo brothers. And I mean, I think they realize like how important it is, like you're saying, to make this work. I mean, I get what Ronald's saying, and that's all absolutely true. I mean, they definitely have, it seems, maybe not done enough like groundwork to this point, but I mean, I gotta believe that there is a way that they've achieved it in this film. Much like, we know nothing about Killmonger in Black Panther, and in the matter of 2 hours, they successfully made him, arguably one of the best villains in the comic book movies, period. And then I know this is a bigger stage, bigger stakes, a bigger team up film. So, I mean, it's a bigger character, and it ties into every other Marvel film in some way. But I mean, I don't know. I gotta have confidence, because I just want it to work so badly that I gotta believe that they have some angle that they're gonna, humanize or give some sort of arc or some sort of backstory, something to the character to make him, like you said, John, the hero of a different movie or hero of a different story. There's something there that is identifiable and relatable, and maybe even questionable in terms of motive and I don't know, morals and things like that. But I just hope. That's all I can do is like I can only hope.
I think that what you said about them earning our trust at this point is very pretty much right on for the way that I feel. I share Ronald's lack of being convinced by anything I've seen just yet.
Well, we'll know shortly. Less than a month.
oh yeah,
Can't wait.
definitely.
Well, those are our favorite moments from the MCU so far. Maybe some new ones in Infinity War will make our list, or get onto one of our lists. But like I mentioned at the top of the episode, we can definitely promise the next episode that we do, episode 212, will be our annual Schmovie Awards. That'll be coming out 2 weeks from now, from when you're listening to this podcast. So if you have any ideas for categories, I mean, John usually does a pretty great job, and we've been kind of brainstorming. I got a couple ideas for cool categories, different things that we haven't done before. Definitely email us at movieschmovie@gmail.com. Or you can comment on our Facebook page, facebook.com/movieschmovie. In terms of subscribing to the podcast, if you want to help us share it, you can find the podcast on really any podcast platform, whatever you prefer to listen to your podcast through, including Spotify, which we're finally on, which we are all really excited about, and Ronald is especially excited about, because it's a pretty big thing to finally be on there. So if that's how you like to consume your audio of any form, we're definitely on Spotify.
Hey, let us know. I don't know. What should people do? Follow us on Facebook, Twitter? Like, where should we send people to say they should let us know if they listen to us on Spotify? Because I'm really interested to see if we've gotten any new listeners just because we're on Spotify.
Too.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Facebook is probably the easiest thing. I mean, we share all of our episodes there anyway, and you can stream it through the Facebook page too if you prefer to do that. So yeah, let us know how you're listening to us if you are listening to us, because I'm hoping people can find us through Spotify pretty easily since a lot of people use that.
Yeah, come find us on Facebook and let Cambridge Analytica steal your entire identity.
There you go. It's a great thing to plan on for the weekend.
We're already being tracked by MoviePass. We've been shills for this service that's more or less a drone flying above your head at all times now. So we may as well just go all in for Big Brother.
Well, that's all we got for this one. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks when we do the Schmovie Awards. And as always, you've made our day. Thanks.
Bye.